Maya was wiping chalk dust from her fingers when the shouting started outside the one-room schoolhouse. 3 village boys had cornered a smaller child near the doorway, laughing as they mimicked clumsy hand signs, mocking the silent talk Maya used with her students who couldn't hear well. Maya's stomach tightened, but she stepped between them anyway, shoulders squared even though her dress was threadbare and her shoes had holes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She lifted her hands and signed one clear sentence. Slow, firm, impossible to misunderstand. Respect is not a gift you earn. It's a right you give. The boys scoffed, until the air went still, like the world had taken a sharp breath. A black carriage rolled into the muddy yard, too polished for this poor corner of the realm. Its wheels didn't splash, they seemed to glide. The village adults froze in place. The children scattered like frightened birds. Maya's heart thudded as a messenger stepped down, tall, pale, dressed in silver-trimmed livery that only one house in the kingdom could afford. The man's eyes moved across the cracked slate boards, the rickety benches, the single lantern that served as luxury, and then landed on her like a verdict. "You are the teacher who knows the hand language," he said. Not a question. A command dressed as speech. Maya swallowed. Stories filled her mind, whispers of a royal court where humans were tolerated, not welcomed, and where a vampire king ruled with a face like winter stone. She had never met a vampire up close. She'd only seen their distant silhouettes on mountain roads at night, like living shadows that owned the moon. She forced her hands not to shake and answered honestly. "Yes. I can sign. I learned for family." "You will come now," the messenger said. "The king requires you." Maya wanted to ask why, but the messenger's gaze carried a warning. Questions were expensive here, and she was poor. She looked back at her students, children who trusted her to make the world kinder, even when the world didn't deserve it. The smallest child she'd defended moments ago watched her with wide eyes, hands hovering like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Maya's throat burned. She nodded once and went to her tiny room behind the schoolhouse to gather what little she owned. Her bundle was light, 2 faded dresses, a few rescued books, and the scarf she wore when the winter wind cut through the walls like knives. As she tied the cloth, she thought of how many times she'd been told she was only a village teacher. How many times she'd been paid in copper and gratitude, as if kindness could replace food. How many times she'd watched people treat silence like stupidity. She pressed her palm to the bundle and made herself one promise. If this palace wants my hands, it will also see my backbone. The road to the capital was darker than it should have been, as if trees leaned away from something they feared. The carriage was quiet. No small talk, no warmth. Maya stared out at the passing forest and tried to arrange her thoughts like lessons. Breathe in, breathe out, stay calm, stay useful. But every mile tightened a knot in her chest. What could a vampire king want from a teacher who couldn't even afford proper paper? When the palace finally rose from the night, Maya's breath caught. White stone glowed under starlight, tall spires piercing the sky like needles. Windows watched her like eyes that didn't blink. Inside, the air smelled of cold marble and expensive incense, like wealth pretending to be holy. She was led through endless halls until massive doors opened into a throne room so vast it made her feel small on purpose. At the far end sat the king. He looked younger than the legends, maybe 30 in appearance, but his presence felt ancient. Dark hair framed a face carved with restraint, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that never learned how to smile. His gaze met hers and Maya understood why people feared him. Not because he looked cruel, because he looked controlled, like a storm choosing when to strike. Then Maya noticed something stranger than his crown, stranger than the silence of the hall. When the king spoke, he didn't. His lips didn't move. Instead, his hands did. Slow, precise, practiced, like every gesture had been sharpened into a weapon. "You can understand this language," his hands said. "Prove it." Maya's pulse stuttered. Deaf. The king wasn't just cold, he lived behind a wall the world refused to build a door for. And suddenly, Maya realized the cruel twist. People weren't afraid of him because he was deaf. They were afraid because he was powerful and deaf, and the court didn't know how to control what it couldn't manipulate with words. Maya lifted her hands, still trembling, and signed back with steady clarity, "I understand." For the first time, something shifted in the vampire king's eyes, an emotion he tried to bury too quickly. And the room, for one dangerous heartbeat, felt like it belonged to the two of them alone. Maya learned quickly that the palace was built on silence, not the peaceful kind, but the dangerous, political kind. Servants bowed low yet avoided her eyes. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled hands. Everyone noticed her, yet no one spoke to her directly, as if a poor human teacher carried a contagious misfortune. Maya felt it in every hallway she walked. She did not belong here, and the palace wanted her to remember that. Her first night was sleepless. The guest chamber was larger than the entire schoolhouse she had taught in, its bed layered with silk she barely dared touch. Moonlight spilled across the stone floor, cold and sharp. Maya sat at the window, hands clasped, wondering if kindness alone had finally led her somewhere dangerous. I can still leave, she told herself. But even as the thought formed, she knew it wasn't true, not anymore. At dawn, she was summoned again. Not by guards or messengers, but by the king himself. He waited in a private solar overlooking the inner gardens. No throne. No crown. Just black clothing, severe and simple, and those eyes, watchful, assessing. When he turned to her, his hands moved with deliberate precision. You answered correctly last night, he signed. Most freeze. Some pretend. Few understand. Maya inclined her head respectfully. I learned young that silence doesn't mean emptiness. Something tightened in his jaw. He gestured for her to sit. When she did, she noticed how carefully he positioned himself so she could see his hands clearly, light behind him, no shadows. He was used to adjusting his world so others wouldn't have to. My court believes deafness is weakness, he signed. They are wrong, but they are powerful in their ignorance. Maya hesitated, then signed back honestly. They mistake loudness for strength. It's a common error. For a long moment, the Vampire King stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but with sharp amusement, like someone who rarely found equals in conversation. He rose and gestured toward a long corridor. You will meet my children. The nursery wing shattered every rumor Maya had heard about vampires. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. The walls were painted in muted blues and golds. Toys lay scattered in careful chaos, and books, real books, not decorative ones, lined low shelves. Two small figures sat on the floor, backs pressed together, hands moving rapidly in patterns Maya didn't recognize. The king stopped at the doorway. His hands hesitated. Maya understood without words. This is where he loses control. She stepped forward first, lowering herself to the floor so she was not towering over them. Slowly, gently, she signed a greeting, simple, open, respectful. The children froze. Then their eyes widened. The girl, Lyra, signed back first, her movements sharp with suspicion. You know real signs. Yes, Maya signed, smiling softly. And I can learn yours too. The boy, Cassian, studied her like a scholar weighing evidence. Adults leave. Maya's chest ached. She signed carefully, choosing truth over comfort. Some do. I don't want to. That was all it took. Within minutes, the room filled with movement, hands flying, expressions vivid, laughter silent but explosive. Maya listened with her eyes, learning their invented language, praising their creativity instead of correcting it. She saw the moment the children relaxed, not because she was royal, but because she treated them as whole. Behind her, the Vampire King watched. For the first time in years, he did not feel shut out of his own family. He watched his children's shoulders loosen, their eyes brighten, their hands slow from frantic defense into joyful expression. Something ancient and aching inside him cracked. When Lyra signed, "Can you teach father properly?" "He's very bad," Maya laughed aloud before she could stop herself. The sound echoed in the room, startling, human, alive. The king raised an eyebrow. "I'm standing here." Maya met his gaze, still smiling. "Then you should practice more, Your Majesty." The court would have called it disrespect. The king called it relief. That night, when Maya finally returned to her chamber, she understood the truth she'd been circling since her arrival. She hadn't been summoned because she was poor, or human, or replaceable. She had been summoned because she saw people where others saw problems. And in a palace built on fear, that was the most dangerous gift of all. If the palace expected Maya to fail quietly, it misjudged her entirely. By the third week, whispers followed her openly. Noble women paused mid-conversation when she entered a room. Tutors who had once paraded their credentials now watched from a distance with thinly veiled resentment. Servants complained when she asked them, politely but firmly, to learn basic sign language so the royal children would not feel invisible in their own home. "She's only a human," some muttered. "She's temporary," others sneered. "The king will tire of her softness." Maya heard none of it, but she saw everything. The first open challenge came during a formal luncheon. Cassian had grown frustrated, his hands moving too fast, his signs tangled in emotion. When a senior court lady snapped at him, too loudly, too sharply, telling him to behave normally, the room went still. Cassian's hands froze. Lyra shrank back, her confidence collapsing like a folded wing. Maya stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not look to the king for permission. She stepped between the children and the noblewoman and signed calmly, deliberately, so everyone could see. "They are behaving perfectly. The problem is not their language. It is your ignorance." Gasps rippled through the hall. No human spoke to nobility that way. No teacher corrected a vampire elder in public. The noblewoman flushed. "You forget your place," she hissed. Maya met her gaze without flinching. "No," she replied softly. "I remember it." All eyes turned to the Vampire King. He rose slowly, the scrape of his chair echoing like thunder. His hands moved, precise, lethal, unmistakable. "She speaks with my authority." The noblewoman paled. That night, the servant was dismissed. By morning, every staff member in the family wing had begun sign lessons. From that moment on, the palace changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. Hallways once filled with whispers now filled with movement. Servants signed greetings. Guards learned simple phrases. The twins no longer avoided public spaces. They belonged. And the king watched it all with quiet astonishment. In private moments, he practiced signing late into the night, frustration etched into every line of his face. Maya corrected him gently, never laughing when he stumbled, never simplifying for his pride. He noticed. He noticed everything. "You do not treat me like a king," he signed one evening. Maya smiled faintly. "You asked me to teach you, not fear you." Something softened between them then, something unspoken and dangerous. Not romance. Not yet. Respect, hard-earned and fragile. But the court was not finished testing her. A formal gathering was announced, one meant to display unity between vampires and humans. Maya understood the trap immediately. She would be presented, judged, dissected. A poor human teacher standing beside a vampire king was a scandal waiting to be exploited. That night, dressed simply but with her spine straight, Maya entered the grand hall on the king's arm. The room fell silent. Not because she was beautiful. Because she was unafraid. When a noble mocked her accent, she smiled. When another questioned her education, she answered calmly. When someone suggested she was manipulating the king, she looked directly at them and signed her reply, forcing the king to translate aloud. "I am not here to rise above you," her words echoed. "I am here to lift children you are content to ignore." The silence afterward was absolute. For the first time, the court understood, this human woman was not temporary. She was not weak. And she was not alone. Later that night, as moonlight spilled across the balcony, the Vampire King stood beside her, hands resting on the stone railing. "You are changing my kingdom," he signed. Maya shook her head gently. "No. I'm just refusing to let it stay cruel." He looked at her then, not as a subject, not as a tool, but as an equal standing in his shadow by choice. And in that moment, the danger between them deepened, because trust had already taken root. The palace did not forgive easily. Kindness had softened its corridors, but power still slept beneath the marble like a coiled serpent, and it did not like being challenged. Maya sensed it in the way certain nobles watched her now, smiles sharpened with calculation. They no longer underestimated her. And that, she knew, made her dangerous. The first threat came disguised as concern. A council decree was announced under the guise of royal efficiency. The twins would be evaluated by the high healers once more. For their own good, the council insisted. Progress must be measured. Alternatives must be explored. Everyone knew what that meant. Forced treatments. Painful experiments. A desperate attempt to fix what was never broken. Maya felt Cassian's hands tremble when the news was signed to him. Lyra's eyes filled with silent panic. That night, Maya stood before the Vampire King in his private chamber, anger burning bright behind her calm expression. "This is not help," she signed sharply. "This is cruelty wearing a crown." The king's jaw tightened. "The council believes they protect the realm." "They protect tradition," Maya answered. "Not children." For the first time since she'd known him, the king hesitated. The council was ancient, older than his reign, older than memory. To defy them openly would invite rebellion. To comply would betray his children. Maya stepped closer, lowering her hands, softening her tone. "You once told me your silence made them afraid. Let them be afraid now, for the right reason." His eyes darkened. The next morning, the council assembled expecting obedience. Instead, they received defiance. The Vampire King stood before them, not on his throne, but on the floor, among them. When he spoke, it was not with voice, but with hands. And this time, he did not translate. Maya did. "These children will not be treated as broken," her voice rang through the hall. "Their language will not be erased. Any healer who attempts to force change will be banished from the realm." Outrage erupted. Accusations flew, about influence, manipulation, corruption. Then Lyra stepped forward. Small, brave, terrified. She signed one sentence. Maya translated through a tight throat, "If you hurt us, Father will not forgive you. And neither will the kingdom when they learn the truth." Silence fell like judgment. That day, the council lost. But victory came at a cost. Rumors spread beyond the palace. Whispers of rebellion. Talk of a human woman controlling a vampire king through foreign gestures. Enemies moved in shadows, and for the first time since arriving, Maya felt fear, not for herself, but for the children who now clung to her hands like anchors. The attack came at dusk. A corridor exploded in shattered glass and screams. Maya had only seconds to react. She shielded Lyra instinctively as guards surged forward. Cassian froze, panic stealing his hands. The king arrived like a storm. He did not shout. He did not roar. He moved. Dark power coiled around him, ancient and terrible. The attackers fell before they understood what they'd unleashed. When it was over, blood stained the marble and the palace trembled with silence once more. The king knelt. Not before the council. Not before his throne. Before Maya. He took her shaking hands in his own and signed, slower than ever before. "I almost lost you." Maya swallowed hard. "You won't," she signed back. "Not if we stand together." For the first time, he rested his forehead against hers, an intimate gesture in vampire culture, one of trust deeper than words. The palace watched. And understood. The human teacher was no longer a guest. She was the heart of the king's protection. After the attack, the palace never felt the same. Not because fear lingered, but because truth had taken root. Guards no longer watched Maya with suspicion. They watched her with respect. Servants signed openly in the halls, correcting one another with quiet smiles. The twins walked hand in hand through spaces that once frightened them, their laughter silent but radiant. And the Vampire King no longer stood alone at the highest point of the realm. The council was forced to yield. One by one, its most rigid members resigned or were removed, exposed by the very cruelty they had tried to disguise as tradition. The kingdom learned the truth, not through proclamations, but through stories whispered in markets and taverns. The deaf king who ruled without a voice, and the human teacher who taught him how to be heard. Maya never asked for a crown. When offered jewels and silk, she chose books and funding for schools instead. When praised as savior, she redirected the attention to the children. Her power came not from authority, but from consistency, from showing up every day with patience instead of pride. One evening, months later, the king stood with her on the highest balcony as snow began to fall. He signed slowly, carefully, no longer afraid of mistakes. "You were never meant to be small," his hand said. "They taught you to believe you were." Maya smiled softly. "And they taught you silence was weakness." He reached for her hands, not as a ruler claiming loyalty, but as a man offering choice. "Stay," he signed. "Not as duty. As family. As my equal." Maya looked out over the kingdom, the lights, the lives, the future shaped by kindness instead of fear. Then she looked back at the man who had once been feared by all, and now trusted her with everything. "I'm not afraid anymore," she signed. He leaned down and rested his forehead against hers, sealing a bond built not on fate or magic, but on respect. Below them, the bells of the city rang, not to announce a coronation, but to celebrate the opening of the first royal school where sign language was taught freely, proudly, and without shame. The kingdom had changed. Because one poor teacher refused to believe silence meant insignificance.